Hello, museum friends, and welcome. It must be Tuesday because we're doing a tour today. I'm Nat, and I will be taking you on a virtual field trip. And right now I am standing in the Roberson Museum and Science Center's Era of Change exhibition, which spans 2 decades of American and Binghamton history. I'll turn the camera around here to give you an idea. So we have immigration, we have new fashions, we have new technologies, new trends and things like that, prohibition, that time period. But that's a lot to cover, and we're not going to cover all that. We're actually going to put the focus on one artifact during today's tour, which is this box. And we're going to tell its story and why it matters and whatnot. But if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below while I give this tour, and I'll answer them after it's over. But yeah, so this wonderful and rather tall, unassuming box is, this rather tall, unassuming box represents a huge shift for women's rights in the 1900s. This is the ballot box that received the first vote made by a woman in New York State on January 5th, 1918. And this box represents one of the many steps in ending a national struggle for women's suffrage, which would officially come in 1920 with the passing of the 19th Amendment. But until that time came, it was actually up to the states to decide. And change was coming from west, as you can see here, to east. So it was coming in slowly via the states. But women had been fighting for a voice in national politics actually since before the Declaration of Independence, before the founding of America. Abigail Adams actually once famously wrote to her husband, John Adams, future second president of the United States, that he should remember the ladies. And he suggested that the other fathers consider giving a voice of representation to women in the United States. She even maybe jokingly threatened, half seriously threatened, that there might be an uprising of women if this was not to come to pass. But her request was answered from her husband, John Adams, with a 1700s LOL and a very firm no. John Adams thought that women having a voice in politics would subject men to, quote, the despotism of the petticoat. So he could not see, him and the other founding fathers could not see women as deciding roles and deciding voices in American politics. And it's important to note here that John Adams and his wife had a pretty good relationship. He would often consult her on certain policies and matters during his presidency and even before then. But in this case, he just could not see her as a public figure. During the time, we've talked in previous videos that there was this cult of domesticity that was the mentality and an ideal that was framed during America at that time, which was that genders kind of decided your natural place in the world. So females were at the home and men were supposed to take over the business and be involved in politics. But in this case, yes, Abigail Adams would not get her wish in having a voice in American politics. And it would actually be 141 years, think about that, 141 years of generations of women that didn't have a decision in choosing presidents, in deciding policies, and in having an influence and a voice, a presence in the minds of politicians, which is kind of interesting to think about. And to keep in mind that there's still issues today where people have been barred from voting through really destructive policies and licenses, requiring a license in order to vote and things like that. But New York State is relatively progressive when it comes to that, fortunately. But back to the box and its story. So just a few months after the passing of New York's amendment to giving women the right to vote on November 1917, in the new year, the village of Lisle held a vote to decide whether the town should go dry. And dry means the ban of the sale of alcohol. And it's important to note that during this time, the temperance movement was in full swing. And women were the driving force in that movement, and so it was relatively assumed that women were going to vote to ban the sale of alcohol. And despite the cold, the January cold, here are the ladies of Lisle that rode in with bells, singing in a parade of cars and trucks down Main Street to cast their ballots for the first time, legally, as women. And the first woman to step up and cast her ballot was this woman, Florence B Chauncey. And that day, the weather wasn't the only cold thing that greeted her. There was a local purveyor of alcoholic beverages that stepped up and stopped her, actually, and said to her, let me get my quote book out here, "I challenge that vote and every other vote cast by any woman in this hall today." And Florence Chauncey was stopped and walked right past him and cast her ballot. And this local purveyor of alcohol would come up to, I think he did this 6 more times to women in line getting ready to cast their ballot, and each one stepped past him. They were exerting their right, as was the law of the land at the time, to cast their ballot for the first time, which is pretty amazing. Yes. So it's uncertain if this gentleman was necessarily against women voting outright, or if he was more afraid of losing his ability to sell alcohol, and he knew that the women were largely going to vote in favor of the ban. And the final vote, the final tally of the day was 335 in favor of the ban and 94 against the ban. And as we know from history, that is later overturned. Was generally, history has looked back at prohibition as a bad idea. But the box that received the first vote of a woman in New York State sits right here. You can cast your own vote in it. You can touch it, which is really great. It's a living piece of history. And like Chauncey's vote and the many who came after her, it'll receive yours too, no matter your age, gender, or political affiliations, which I think is rather beautiful. And so when we open again, you can cast your vote. We have a few historical votes that you can vote on, like whether or not the town should go dry, so we can tally that up. As well as a few other questions we have on the ballots. But it's looking like we might open again in June, July. Fingers crossed. And until that time, consider becoming a member. You can become a member and receive, with that yearly membership, you can come in anytime for free, when we're open, of course, and get free planetarium shows, discounts on events, discount in our gift shop, all that jazz. So a way to support your museum while we're closed and get ready to come back out into the world is become a member of the museum. And you also receive free or discounted admission to other museums, which is pretty cool. So you can start to plan your outside adventure when we're all allowed to be back out into the world together. But if you have any questions, I'll be answering them for the next hour or so, and probably well after. So if you have any questions about women's suffrage in New York State, in Binghamton, in America, America. I think that probably spans most of my knowledge of suffrage during that time period. But I'll be happy to answer them down in the comments below. But until next time, until next Tuesday, we'll be back here again with another Tuesday tour, so long as we're closed. And we have classes. We have classes this Thursday for kids if you want to come join. I believe, I can't remember what the class is, but we do have classes for kids coming up, and we have more classes after that every Thursday via Zoom with our wonderful educator, Annie. But yeah, so I'll see you all in the next video. Until that time, bye guys, stay safe.